We're almost at the end of our sonata form piece now, but it wouldn't be complete without this third and final recapitulation section. Recapitulation. And this is a very long word to basically say the return of the first and second subject melodies that we heard at the start of the piece in the exposition. And so that's exactly what happens in the recapitulation. We're going to hear the first subject again, and we're going to hear the second subject again. And this arrival at the return of the first subject is a really important moment in the piece, and lots of composers like to play around with our expectation of where that's going to be, because as we get towards the end of the development section, we know this is coming. If we're listening to a sonata form movement, we know that we're going to have that return in the recapitulation. So as we get towards the end of the development, the composer can play with our expectations. Sometimes composers bring back a sort of trick first subject, so it's not really the first subject we think that it is, but it's not. And whatever they do, they try and build up our expectation of this important moment where the first subject returns. This, by the way, this moment here is often all about setting up a dominant seventh harmony. So we know we're going back into the tonic key. So if we were in this key of C major, we said this piece was in C major, so we'd be expecting a section that made a lot of dominant seventh harmony, because we need to prepare to go back to the tonic key of C major. So that's what happens through that section, this retransition, as it's sometimes called. Retransition. And what it's doing is just preparing the music to go back to the tonic. And that's what we get. So at the beginning of our recapitulation, we have the first subject, and then we have our bridge passage. But something interesting happens, because it's kind of important that the recapitulation does its job, not only of reminding us of that first and second subject, but also closing off the piece in an effective way. There'd be no point, having gone on that amazing journey, not to have an ending to the piece that feels complete and whole. I think we'd feel quite dissatisfied with the experience if the piece just sort of ended and it wasn't really resolved and it didn't end on the home key or the tonic key. And so that's what we need to change, really, because if we were to replicate what happens here, we've got our bridge passage in the exposition, and that takes us from tonic to dominant. In this case, it's just an example. You might be modulating to the relative minor or the subdominant key or another key that's closely related to the tonic key. But if we did the same thing here, we'd have a bit of a problem, because we'd end up finishing the piece in the dominant key, which probably wouldn't feel all that complete and closed. It would feel actually quite unfinished. And so something different happens. We don't modulate anymore, and we have the bridge passage in the recapitulation. We just stay happily in our tonic home key, and that's a way that a composer can just bring the thing to a close. After we've heard the second subject for the second time, we might have something called a coda. That just is another passage of music that really indicates that we're coming to the end of this quite big sonata form structure. So once we've had the end of the recapitulation, that is it. So that is the end of our sonata form. I'd say now you know approximately what to listen out for as you hear these types of piece. Just have a go and have a listen and see if you can pick out the journey that we go on through the sonata, starting in the exposition, moving on to the development section, and finally rounding the whole thing off with the recapitulation.